Hey, my name's Sean. I'm an Enneagram teacher and a psychotherapist, and today we're talking all about type 6 on the Enneagram. Type 6 goes by a couple of different names. They're often called the Loyalist, Skeptic, or the Devil's Advocate. And these names evoke a character who's very loyal and dependable and reliable. Type 6s are great to have around in a crisis, and they're really good problem solvers and analytical thinkers. However, type 6s can easily get caught up in cycles of doubt and questioning. They have a tendency to focus on worst case scenarios, which means they're often missing the positive. And when it comes to relationships, they can have difficulty trusting others, which means they test people a lot. I should note that type 6s can show up in a variety of different ways because they're centered around fear, and there's of course many different ways that we can respond to fear. So if you are a type 6 and you're watching this video and some of the things that I say don't resonate with you, that's okay. It's mostly got to do with the subtypes, which is something I'm going to cover at the end of this video. Starting out with the origins of this type, the basic unconscious belief for type 6 is that the world is unpredictable and untrustworthy. Many 6s typically have a sense that they can't really trust themselves, and they can't trust the world, and they can't trust other people either. Many 6s talk about growing up in an environment where they just didn't really feel safe as a kid. This could have, for example, involved a parent who was an alcoholic or mentally ill, or just someone who was really unpredictable. And so they kind of found safety by retreating into their mind and trying to predict and plan what was going to happen, thinking about all the worst case scenarios, in order to make sure that they were going to be safe against whatever happened. Another strong theme that emerges for 6s is having a parent or both parents who are either really overprotective, who are authoritarian, or who are weak. And whatever the dynamic may be, this kind of sends a message to the child that they're not safe. And so they therefore need to find some way to get a sense of safety back into their lives. As a result of these early relationships, a lot of 6s have a very dubious relationship with authority. They can sometimes be overly loyal to a fault, where they're kind of giving their loyalty to authorities that don't deserve it or are actually abusing that loyalty. Or they can just be downright rebellious. Whatever the case may be, 6s often fluctuate between these two depending on the context and also the time of their life as well. Type 6s can be found in the head center of the Enneagram, where the core emotion is anxiety. Now, compared to type 5 and 7, I'd say that 6s are the most viscerally anxious people. Whenever I'm around 6s, I really get a sense of their anxiety. It's a really embodied kind of energetic feeling. They're often on the edge of their seat, there's a tension in their body, they're kind of scanning the room looking for danger. And relationally, there's always this kind of underlying feeling of mistrust. So they're not really sure about what you're saying, and not really sure of your intentions and motivations. Being a head type, type 6s are trying to resolve their anxiety through thinking. They're trying to think about all of the things that could go wrong and all of the dangers, and then thinking about how they could respond to those things to make sure that they're well prepared. However, this can lead to 6s getting caught up in cycles of doubt and questioning. And this is exacerbated by the problem of not really trusting themselves or other people. Imagining a scenario where they're asking for someone's opinion on something and they share their idea, even if the other person agrees with that idea and says that's a great thing, the type 6 might not really trust that person. Maybe that person's misleading them or just saying yes when they really mean no. And so type 6s will doubt that other person, but then when they check in with themselves, they're not 100% sure of their own opinion either. And so it leads to this kind of feedback loop in this cycle of consistently not being sure about things. And what most 6s are craving is this kind of sense of certainty, of really being able to trust something and knowing that it's solid, just to have some ground to stand on. The passion for type 6 is called fear. And this one's pretty self-explanatory. It's a fear of the unknown, kind of an obsessive worrying about potential threats and dangers to one's well-being. Now, because we've just talked about anxiety, it might help to draw a distinction between fear and anxiety, and there's definitely a lot of overlap between these two concepts, especially for type 6s. Anxiety is something we can think of as being future-orientated, in the sense it's an anticipation of threats or danger. Whereas fear is very much a response to threats or danger. So it's having something in your immediate environment that is a threat to you and then being afraid of it. The problem here is that 6s often are generating things to be afraid of. So it's not as though 6s are always in dangerous situations that they need to be afraid of things. Rather, because of the way their minds are working, they're constantly on the lookout for threats and dangers and believing that things are unpredictable and untrustworthy and could go wrong at any minute. 6s are constantly finding things to be afraid of, even though everything might actually just be fine in their environment. And this brings us to the defense mechanism for type 6, which is called projection. Projection involves disowning something that's originating from inside one's experience, and instead projecting it out onto the world, experiencing it as though it's coming from something else. This serves a real defensive function for sixes because a lot of the fear and doubt they're feeling can be really uncomfortable. And so instead of just believing that they are the source of it, they project it out onto the world. And so other things or people become the source of their fear and doubt, and therefore it becomes more manageable. They have a bit more control over it. They can get away from that person, or perhaps they can avoid them in the future to make sure that they're not feeling this way. The problem with this being, of course, that sixes are generating most of this. Sixes are being afraid of something because they've perceived that thing to be a threat to them, even though it may not be. This can obviously cause a lot of problems in relationships. Many people who are in relationship with sixes kind of feel misperceived and misjudged by them, and feel as though they're kind of being blamed for things or being ridiculed for things that they're not actually doing, but because the sixes are perceiving that other person to be a threat or danger or to have done something wrong, it puts the other person on the back foot and makes them quite defensive. What really needs to happen is for the sixes to be able to actually own the fact that they're the ones that are creating most of this confusion. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of variance in the ways that type sixes can show up, and this relates to the subtypes. Type sixes are roughly grouped according to the ways in which they respond to fear. Self-preservation fears are the most fearful of the type sixes. They will seek out support through allies and friends who are going to offer them protection. These sixes are very warm and friendly and sweet, and they offer their loyalty hoping that in return they will have other people take care of them. Social sixes are a bit more ambiguous, and they're really worried about threats and danger from authority figures. And so these sixes will try to ally themselves with very strong authority figures and give them their loyalty, often seeking total submission. These sixes can often seek out organizations or institutions that have very strong rules or regulations, such as a church, for example, that they can then ally themselves to, and getting a sense of safety through completely abiding by these rules and regulations. We then have the sexual six, which really doesn't look like the other two sixes. And instead of moving away from fear and danger, they instead move towards it, coming from a place of intimidation and strength. They embody this notion that the best defense is offense. And this can look physically intimidating in the sense that they're kind of big and strong and muscular. Or it can even be from a place of beauty in the sense that they're physically attractive, which can be a source of intimidation towards others. The growth path for type sixes involves them being able to recognize the ways in which they are perpetuating their own sense of fear and doubt and insecurity. Most of the stuff that's going on for type sixes is coming from inside of themselves, but they're living in this really weird paradox. Even if they know that idea, they still doubt it in some sense. They still don't trust that. And so the cycle just continues because they're always on the lookout for something that's certain. I think on a deep, profound level, sixes are really just looking for something that's 100% guaranteed, but of course, that's not how life works. There is always a chance that things could go wrong. And so therefore, the virtue for sixes is called faith. It's the capacity to just believe that things are going to be okay, that things are going to work out. Even though all of that doubt and distrust is there, just learning to quieten the mind a bit and instead just believe that things are going to be okay. In some sense, this helps sixes to show up more like healthy nines. Sixes can just become more content and comfortable with things and find a place of peace within themselves. Instead of doubting and questioning and worrying about things all the time, they're just able to trust that things are going to be okay and everything's going to work out. And this really helps them to kind of calm that anxiety and fear and just become a bit more mellow. For those of you who have type sixes in your life, here's a couple of things you can do to help better navigate your relationships with them. Firstly, it can be really tempting to try to resolve a lot of the stuff that sixes are experiencing, their doubt, their uncertainty, and their fear. When we see someone who's afraid, of course we want to step in and help them and reassure them. It's a natural impulse to do so. The difficulty is that these are long established patterns and that they're going to cycle and continue over time. This can easily lead to burnout and exhaustion if you're trying to constantly reassure someone and they're never really quite sure. They're always doubting and questioning. It's important to recognize that this is work that sixes have to do on their own, that you can't save them from this. It's really things that they need to master in their own mind, and they need to find their own power and strength to be able to conquer what's happening, rather than you doing it for them. The other thing I would mention is that in relationship with sixes, it can be really trying when they're testing you. If they're putting a lot of blame on you, or doubting you, or questioning you, or projecting their stuff onto you, it can be a really uncomfortable position to be in. In these moments, I would just encourage you to have compassion. Hopefully this video has helped you to understand their position a bit more and recognize that a lot of what they're doing is just coming from a place of fear. And when we're scared, we often do silly things. So try to reassure them and comfort them more and help them to see how they're doing all of this from a place of compassion and patience. That brings us to the end of our introduction for type 6. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and make sure to subscribe to our channel because you'll get updates on our latest Enneagram videos. For those of you who are type 6s, I'd really love to hear about your experience. Please drop a comment below. And for the rest of you who have any questions or other things to add, you can also leave a comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.